Hey everyone, before we get started, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so YouTube keeps sending you more spine-chilling stories like these. Story 1. The shovel handle was slick with sweat and dirt, and my arms felt like they were full of wet concrete. The air in this hollow was heavy, muggy even for mid-September in West Virginia. Every breath I took smelled like wet stone and decaying leaves. I had to get this done before the sun dropped completely. My heart wasn't pounding from the work. It was pounding because of what I was burying. It wasn't a body. I want to make that clear. It was just the haul. A suitcase full of marked bills and a few pieces of high-end jewelry, the kind you couldn't fence anywhere near here. Me and my cousin, Ray, had been clean for almost 2 years, but that easy money itch, it always comes back, doesn't it? We hit a retired jeweler's house 80 miles away, a quick smash and grab, and we were supposed to lay low. But the news was everywhere. They were talking about feds, about wiretaps, about a silent alarm we never saw. The heat was on, and we needed to ditch this evidence where no sniffer dog or metal detector would ever find it. Ray knew this place. He grew up running these hills. Old Man Hemlock's mine, he'd said. Ain't been active since before the Depression. Goes deep, maybe a mile down, perfect vault. I was about 20 feet past the collapsed main entrance, inside a side shaft that looked stable enough. The hole I dug was beside a vein of low-grade slate. It was a shallow grave for a lot of trouble. I kicked a last clod of dirt over the briefcase and used the back of the shovel to smooth the ground. Done. I wiped my forehead with the back of a gritty hand and finally let myself relax. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a rodent. It was a sound of metal dragging on stone, slow and measured, coming from deeper inside the mine. What the hell was that? The mine was supposed to be completely deserted. Ray was waiting for me a half-mile away at the truck. No one else knew this shaft even existed. Who else would be this far back, this deep in the woods, hours after sunset? A tremor of real fear, the kind that steals your spit, ran through me. I froze, listening, the headlamp on my forehead casting a nervous, yellow beam that jumped every time my hands shook. The dragging sound stopped. Then came a different noise, a dry, rhythmic scraping, like someone shaving wood with a dull knife. I swallowed hard. Hello. The sound of my own voice was pathetic, a reedy whisper swallowed instantly by the vast black silence. I decided I was leaving. Now, I grabbed my tools, turned to scramble back toward the entrance, and that's when my light caught something on the wet rock wall. It was a symbol, not graffiti. It was painted with something thick and dark, maybe mud, maybe something worse, and it was complex. A circle with a stylized deer antler piercing it, and 3 jagged lines running down the middle. It looked ancient and new at the same time. And right beneath it, resting on a flat, mossy boulder, was the offering. It was a bundle, wrapped in what looked like old, coarse burlap, tied with a length of rope made of braided horsehair. I tried to convince myself it was just some old miner's junk, a forgotten bag of tools. But as I edged closer, my stomach twisted. The package was too small to be a bag of tools. It was roughly the size and shape of a human head. A metallic, coppery smell hung in the air, overpowering the usual earth and sulfur scent of the mine. Curiosity, that stupid, deadly impulse, took over. I had to know, just a peek. I told myself it was some animal carcass left by a predator. I reached out a trembling finger and nudged the bundle. The burlap was stiff. As I did, I heard the sound again. This time it was closer. A wet, sucking sound, like heavy boots being pulled from deep mud. It was coming from the dark corner where the side shaft met the main tunnel, where I was supposed to be going. I whipped the light around. Nothing, just the shadows playing tricks. My fear turned into a cold, clinical decision. Get out now. I scrambled backward, but I must have kicked a loose stone because it went clattering down the tunnel, and then the noises started in earnest. A low, guttural moan echoed down the shaft. It wasn't human. It was too deep, too long, vibrating in my chest. Then a quick, shuffling footstep, fast. I didn't think about the cash, the shovel, or the light. I turned and sprinted. My heart was a drum machine gone haywire. What the hell is in here? I burst out of the side shaft and into the main tunnel, plunging down the slight incline toward the mouth of the mine. I could hear the shufflings and moans behind me, now amplified by the tunnel walls. I risked a glance back. My light was bouncing too much, but I saw a movement in the shadows I just left, a shape that didn't belong, too tall, too thin. I didn't look again. I ran like I was being chased by the devil himself, dodging the supporting timbers and the pools of standing water. I was almost there. I could see the square of weak moonlight showing the mine's entrance. Then my foot caught on a rusty rail I'd forgotten about, and I went down. My headlamp flew off and smashed against a rock. Total blackness. The silence was instant, complete, and terrifying. My ears rang. I tasted blood in my mouth from biting my tongue. I was blind. I scrambled on my hands and knees, trying to locate the entrance, but I was disoriented. The shuffles were closer now. I could hear heavy, ragged breathing, closer than it should be. "Please," I whispered, not to whatever was coming, but just to the air. The breathing stopped directly in front of me. I could feel the change in the air current, the disturbance of the dust. I could smell the metallic, coppery scent much stronger now, mixed with something else, something rank, like spoiled meat and wet wool. I heard a click, a faint, low sound. Then a voice. It was a whisper, but it was dry and brittle like old paper. "He sees your offering." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The voice was deep and wrong, like gravel being poured down a pipe. I didn't leave anything. I stammered, paralyzed, trying to look into the darkness. "The metal offering. The shinies," the voice rasped, and I realized what it meant, the briefcase. How did it know? I buried that thing 20 feet into the side shaft. Was it watching the whole time? A hand, no, not a hand, something long and rigid, brushed my cheek. The skin was rough and cold, like dried leather stretched over bone. I screamed, finally, a raw, desperate sound, and thrashed away, crawling blindly backward until my back hit the cold stone wall. "Don't run from the gift, little man," the voice sighed. "He likes the gift. But the gift requires a binder." I heard the sound of the dry, brittle hand moving on the stone floor. It was searching. I knew, with sickening certainty, that it was looking for me. I had no weapon. I had nothing. I scrambled left, away from the voice, on my belly until I felt an opening. A ventilation shaft, maybe. I didn't care. I dove in, squeezing myself through the narrow gap. The move was desperate, but it worked. I was in a crawl space, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I heard a frustrated, drawn-out groan from the main tunnel. "The binder is part of the contract," the voice insisted, now much louder, its tone shifting from cold whisper to cold fury. "You can't pay the toll with only metal. You brought the valuables to his house." I crawled, faster than I thought possible. I scraped my knees raw on the shale, pulling myself along by my fingertips. After what felt like an hour, I saw a distant, faint sliver of moonlight. The other, long-forgotten entrance. Ray hadn't mentioned this one. I burst out into the cool night air, coughing, covered in mud and fear. I didn't look back. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran until I hit the gravel logging road, and I kept running. When I finally reached the truck, Ray was asleep, slumped over the steering wheel. I grabbed him and shook him awake. "Go drive now," I screamed. He blinked at me, confused. "What the hell? Where's the shovel? You're soaked in mud, man." "It's gone, Ray, forget it. The money, all of it, just drive." He saw the look on my face, the sheer naked terror, and he didn't argue. He started the engine, threw the truck into gear, and we roared down the mountain. I never told him what I saw or what I heard. He kept asking about the money for months, asking if I buried it somewhere else. I just told him the whole shaft collapsed and I barely made it out. I gave him my watch and all the cash in my wallet, told him to shut up about it, and he finally did. But I know the truth. The mine wasn't a vault, it was a tomb. And I didn't just bury stolen cash. I left an offering in a place that takes its payment in far more than just money. And that feeling, the constant, paralyzing dread that someone or something is going to come looking for the rest of its contract, that's what I live with now. I left the shinies, but I forgot that in the deepest parts of Appalachia, you don't bargain with the darkness. You become a part of the deal. I never went back to the mountains. I don't go out at night anymore. I check the locks 3 times before I sleep, because I keep asking myself, what exactly did that thing mean by a binder? And how long does he wait before he comes to collect what I owe? I'm starting to think I know the answer to the second question. Tonight, I found a small, perfectly smooth black stone on my porch, and lying right next to it was a single 3-inch length of braided horsehair rope. Story 2. I hated the rain here. Not the gentle, soaking kind, but the storms that clawed at the side of the mountain. My name is Clay, and I was wrapping up my final week as a volunteer fire lookout on Spruce Knob in the Monongahela National Forest. The cabin was sturdy, but when the wind hit just right, it sounded like a ghost was trying to tear the shingles off. It was 1:17 a.m. according to the glow of my old digital clock. The lightning had been near constant for an hour, turning the forest outside my small, glassed-in perch from black to white and back again, revealing nothing but sheets of water and whipping hemlocks. I was supposed to be sleeping, but the storm made it impossible. I was sipping on cold coffee, watching the weather map on my old laptop, trying to track the eye of the system, when I heard the scratch. It was the radio. My main communication was a VHF set connected to the Forest Service network, and it was tuned to the emergency frequency. It was usually silent unless a bear got into someone's campsite or a hiker needed a med evac. Now, a faint, static-choked noise was fighting its way through the white noise of the downpour. I slammed the coffee down and grabbed the mic. Lookout 47, repeat, Lookout 47. Is anyone calling on E-channel? The scratchy noise stopped. For a second I thought it was just atmospheric interference. Then the sound came back, louder this time, and it wasn't static. It was a pattern. 3 long beeps, pause, 3 long beeps, pause, 3 long beeps. It was SOS, a distress signal. My gut seized up. This wasn't some kid playing with a walkie-talkie. It was deep in the middle of a massive storm, and someone was broadcasting an international distress signal. I keyed the mic. Lookout 47 acknowledging the signal. Identify your location and status. Over. The beeping stopped. A voice, barely a whisper, ragged with fear and static, cut through. Lost. The rest was eaten by a blast of thunder. Then clearer. The water. Cold. Need help. Listen to me, I commanded, my voice sharp. I need coordinates. Do you have a GPS? Give me an intersection, a trail name, anything. The falls, Raven Creek Falls, South Ridge. The voice broke again, fatting into a choked cough. Don't come from the road, he'll see. Then silence, total dead silence. The radio was back to its dull, constant SHHHH. Raven Creek Falls. I knew that area. It was almost 5 miles as the crow flies, straight down the mountain. A rugged, terrible descent that no sensible hiker would attempt in a storm. More importantly, it was known for being home to a couple of unregistered, off-grid operations. People who liked their privacy. People who grew things they shouldn't. My official instruction was to report the signal and wait for search and rescue team. But the search and rescue was hours away, probably blocked by washed-out roads. And the voice said, he'll see. That didn't sound like a lost hiker. It sounded like a fugitive. Was this a true emergency or a trap? The doubt was a knot in my stomach, but I couldn't just sit here. The person sounded desperate, and the water was rising fast in all the hollows. I grabbed my gear, my heavy-duty flashlight, a basic first aid kit, a coil of rope, and the hunting knife my grandfather gave me. I left a note on my desk with the time and the coordinates of Raven Creek Falls, just in case. Stepping outside the cabin was like walking into a cold shower thrown by a giant. The wind tried to rip the pack off my shoulders. The ground was already slick mud. The trail down was an animal path at best, and the rain turned it into a treacherous, rushing stream. I pushed for 30 minutes. The descent was brutal. Every step was a gamble. The flashlight beam was useless in the dense fog and rain, so I relied on the flashes of lightning to momentarily light my path. I finally reached the lower elevation, where the creek was a raging torrent. It had burst its banks, swallowing the forest floor. That's when I saw the first sign that this wasn't just a simple rescue. Lying half submerged in the rushing brown water was a hiking boot. It was new, expensive, and a man's size, but it hadn't been washed away naturally. The laces were neatly sliced and the toe was caked with blood. I felt a fresh wave of cold. The voice on the radio was talking about someone else. He'll see. I turned off my headlamp, relying only on the occasional flashes of scaphier. I became part of the darkness, moving slow, silent, and low to the ground. What kind of person would force someone to cut their own laces? I finally got within earshot of the falls. The roar of the water was immense, a natural barrier to sound. I moved toward the sound, flashlight off, knife ready. I saw the light first. Not a friendly campfire light, but a single, steady yellow glow coming from behind a massive outcrop of shale, maybe 50 yards from the creek's edge. And I heard another sound, distinct from the water. A low, rhythmic thump, 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 like someone driving a stake into the ground. I crept closer, using the water and the wind to mask my movement. I edged around a thicket of rhododendrons, and then I saw it all. The light came from a single, oil-fed lantern hanging near a small, crudely built lean-to, but it wasn't a campsite. There was a man there, a huge, silent figure in dark, heavy oilskins and a wide-brimmed hat, his back to me. He was standing over something, and he was the source of the thumping. He was holding a large mallet. I finally found the person who called for help. They were tied spread-eagle to a felled log near the edge of the creek, their body half in the churning water. They were shivering uncontrollably, their mouth gagged with a bandana. They were dressed in hiking gear. The man with the mallet raised the tool again, and I realized what the thumping was. He wasn't driving a stake. He was slowly, methodically breaking the fingers of the person tied to the log. Each strike made a sickening, wet crunch that even the roar of the water couldn't quite mask. Was the person still alive? The victim's eyes were wide and staring directly at the huge man, their body arching silently with pain. The big man finally stopped and leaned close, his silhouette blocking the lantern light. I heard his voice, a thick, cold Appalachian drawl, easily audible over the water now that he was close to the victim. "You called out, didn't you, boy?" the big man said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Said you wouldn't tell a soul what you saw, then the static started." He chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "You don't call out from my mountain, you just disappear." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just found the radio signal. He had been listening, and he had tracked the person down, maybe even let them call out to draw someone else in. Was he waiting for me? I had to do something. If I waited, the victim would die of exposure or the man would finish them. I had to create a distraction. I picked up a grapefruit-sized rock and hurled it as hard as I could toward the opposite side of the clearing. It landed with a loud smack in the wet brush. The big man's head snapped up. He went utterly still, holding the mallet mid-swing. He didn't look toward the noise. He looked straight into the dark woods where I was hiding. He had heard me approach, or maybe he'd been expecting a rescue all along. "Well now," he drawled, his voice rising, "looky here. Thought maybe the feds heard the noise. Instead, I got a little mountain mouse." He didn't hesitate. He dropped the mallet and pulled a pistol from inside his oilskins. It looked like an old, heavy .45. He started walking slowly toward the thicket, his eyes scanning the darkness, the lantern light leaving his position dark and obscured by shadows. If I ran, he'd shoot me in the back. If I stayed, he'd find me. I had one chance. I needed to move fast and use the storm. I sprang up, not running away, but charging toward the man on the log. I didn't try to tackle the huge man. I just sprinted for the lantern, the victim, and the rushing water. The man in the oilskins fired. The shot was deafening, a flash of orange that momentarily blinded me. I felt the heat of the bullet as it zipped past my shoulder. I hit the lean-to first, my shoulder smashing into one of the support poles. The whole thing shook, and the lantern, which was just on a hook, swung violently, then tore loose and flew toward the water. It didn't make it. It smashed onto the ground near the bound man's legs, splashing burning oil everywhere. "You idiot!" the big man roared, turning to save his equipment and maybe his captive, who was now screaming silently behind his gag. That was the opening. I didn't try to free the victim. I grabbed the heavy steel mallet the man had dropped. He turned back to me, the pistol raised, ready to fire again. I didn't wait. I swung the mallet in a wide, desperate arc. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening, heavy thud. He staggered, his hat flying off, revealing a bald, scarred head. The pistol clattered into the mud. He was stunned but not down. He let out a bellow of pain and lunged for me, his massive hands reaching for my throat. I knew I couldn't fight him physically. I sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him past me toward the creek. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the embankment. I grabbed the thick horsehair rope that tied the victim's wrists and sawed at it with my knife. The rope was tough, but the man had used cheap twine on the ankles. I sliced through the ankles first, giving the victim's legs freedom. The big man was scrambling back up the bank, furious. "You're dead, boy, you hear me? Dead." I cut the last rope securing the victim's wrist. "Go, run, crawl, anything," I yelled, pulling the gag free. The victim, a young woman, was too weak to stand. She could only manage a hoarse whisper. "The bridge, it's out." The big man was on us. I didn't try to run. I shoved the woman with all my strength, pushing her into the deep brush away from the creek. Then I turned and faced him. He was huge, his face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous rage. He came at me, swinging his arms like clubs. I dodged the first swing, but the second one caught my shoulder, sending me flying back. I landed hard, knocking the wind out of me, the rain hitting my face like small stones. He stalked toward me, a cruel smile splitting his lips. "Didn't know you had a death wish, little lookout." He reached down to grab me. Instinct took over. My hand found a thick branch in the mud. I didn't swing, I poked, hard, straight into his eye. He screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure agony. He clutched his face, stumbling blindly toward the roaring water. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the woman. We crawled through the thorns and mud, following the creek downstream, away from the man's bellowing. We had to get to the road. I knew that the man, injured or not, would be tracking us. How many people were part of his operation? Was there a cabin nearby? We kept moving until we reached an old, disused logging trail. We collapsed there, exhausted, the rain finally starting to slow. I checked the woman. Broken fingers, bruises, severe hypothermia, but alive. Thank you," she whispered, her teeth chattering. I saw his patch, a big P on his shoulder, private security. They were guarding a massive grow site. I stumbled in and he caught me. He said he was going to make an example of me. We eventually made it to a main road and flagged down a state trooper who was running storm patrol. I told him everything. Later, the police went up the mountain. They found the lean-to, the cut ropes, the bloodied log, and the scattered oil from the broken lantern. But the big man was gone. They found no pistol. They found the massive grow site she talked about, abandoned, the crops ruined by the storm. They found no body. I gave my statements and the victim recovered. I got praise for ignoring orders and saving a life, but I never went back to the lookout tower. Sometimes, when the wind blows hard through the trees outside my new, lower elevation home, I still think about that man. He knew my job, he knew where I was, and I know I hurt him bad. Did he survive the night, or did the creek take him? I don't know, but I also know this. Did I truly escape him, or did I just postpone the final payment? I left the mountain, but I know the things that happen in those hills don't stay there. They come down with the rain, and I am always watching my windows when a storm hits, half expecting to see a tall silhouette in oilskin standing just beyond the porch light. Story 3. My name is Silas, and for the last 7 months my world has been 50 acres of hardwoods on a steep ridge in eastern Kentucky. I'm a contract logger. One man, one skidder, one chainsaw. You spend enough time alone with a screaming saw and the steady fall of timber, and you start hearing things. That's just part of the job. But what I was hearing, and what I was finding, was starting to chew through my sanity faster than my stihl cut through oak. It all started the day I cleared the boundary line near Widow's Creek. It's a deep, shadowy ravine no one ever messes with. The local boys say it's bad luck, haunted by the memory of a family that starved there back in the 30s. I don't believe in ghosts, but I respect old whispers. I was felling a massive tulip poplar when I spotted it. Tucked neatly into the crook of an old ironwood tree about eye level was a small carved wooden bird. It wasn't rough tourist trap stuff. It was exquisite. The grain of the wood followed the curve of the wings, and the eyes were tiny, smooth pieces of glass. It looked like a junco, a common forest bird, but frozen, unnaturally perfect. I picked it up. It felt warm, like it had just been handled. Who put this here? I thought. I hadn't seen another human soul for days. The nearest road was 2 miles away, and this part of the lot was practically vertical. There were no hikers, no local kids. Was someone watching me work? I shrugged it off. Maybe an old local craftsman had hiked in for a look. I tossed the carving into the cab of my skidder, finished my day, and drove my pickup back to my lonely trailer down by the creek. 3 days later, I was back on the upper ridge cleaning up some slash piles. I hadn't thought about the bird again. I was working until about 6:30 p.m., the light fading fast, and I was exhausted. I hauled myself back into the cab, checked my mirrors, and froze. Sitting on the passenger seat, right where I'd left my lunch pail, was the bird carving. But it wasn't alone. Beside it was a small, smooth river stone, the kind you only find at the very bottom of the creek bed. And resting on the stone was a perfectly shelled black walnut. My stomach dropped. The carving was in the skidder cab, which I had locked. I always lock it. I use a heavy chain and padlock on the hydraulics when I leave for the night. This was not a quick visit. Someone had been inside my machine. I checked the doors, locked the windows shut tight, no sign of entry. It has to be Ray, I decided, my heart hammering. Ray was the landowner, an old hermit who rarely left his porch. He must have hiked up, found the bird I dropped, and left it with the nut as some kind of weird, old man-friendly gesture. It had to be. But a question kept nagging. How did he get inside my locked cab without leaving a scratch? That night, I didn't sleep well. Every snap of a twig outside my trailer sounded like a footstep. The next morning, I took the carved bird and the stone and put them in a small plastic container, which I then put inside a locked metal toolbox. The toolbox went in the deepest corner of my trailer closet, under a pile of filthy clothes. If it's Ray, he won't go rummaging in my personal stuff. I spent the next day working in a frenzy, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous. Around noon, my saw kicked back, ripping a sizable hole in my thick leather chaps. Nothing serious, but enough to rattle me. I stopped early, deciding I needed to patch the chaps before I went back in the woods. When I got back to the trailer, the sun was sinking behind the ridge, painting the sky a violent orange. I walked inside, dropped my gear, and went straight to the closet. I pulled out the toolbox. It was locked. I unlocked it, heart pounding, sweat cold on my neck. The plastic container was inside. I opened it. The carved bird was there. The smooth stone was there. But now, resting precisely on top of the stone, was a small, needle-sharp sliver of tulip poplar wood. It was exactly the color and texture of the wood that had been chewed up when my saw ripped my chaps hours earlier. I stood there, breathing too fast, staring at the sliver of wood. It was impossible. It defied logic. This sliver was a direct result of an accident that happened 4 miles away in a machine that only I operated. This wasn't Ray. This wasn't a friendly gesture. This was a message, a perfect, terrifying confirmation that someone was with me, watching me, anticipating my accidents. The following night was the worst. I didn't work. I stayed awake, sitting in my darkened trailer, holding my rifle, listening to the vast, mocking silence of the woods. Around midnight, a high fog rolled in from Widow's Creek, smothering the entire trailer in a damp, gray shroud. The silence was so absolute that my ears ached. Then I heard it, a faint tap, tap, tap sound coming from the side of the trailer. It was quiet but unmistakable, like someone lightly testing the aluminum siding with a fingernail. I swung the rifle up, pointing it at the thin wall. "Who's there?" I yelled. My voice was a choked, pathetic croak. The tapping stopped. The silence came rushing back, heavier now. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing. Just the slow, wet drip of condensate off the eaves. I convinced myself it was a loose wire, a tree branch. I lowered the rifle, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I took a deep, shaky breath and turned to check the front window. That's when I saw it. The window of my trailer was foggy with the damp night air, and etched into the moisture right at eye level was a perfect, life-sized outline of the carved bird. It hadn't been drawn with a finger. The lines were too fine, too precise. It was like a perfect stamp had been pressed against the glass, leaving the outline of the artifact I had locked away. I scrambled back, knocking over my coffee table, hyperventilating. It was inside my head. The isolation was finally getting to me. The mountain was driving me crazy. Or was it? I spent the rest of the night curled on the floor, the rifle across my lap, watching the front door. The next day, I knew I had to leave. I had to get off the mountain before I completely shattered. But I couldn't just run. I needed proof. I needed to see who was doing this. I drove the skidder back up to the work site, but I didn't turn on the saw. I found a high spot on a rocky outcrop where I could watch the entire clearing, and I waited. I was hidden by a thick patch of laurel bushes. The sun went down. The forest turned into a maze of deep purple and black. The anxiety was a physical weight on my chest. I waited until the moon was high and bright, casting long, stark shadows across the clearing. I was about to give up, to admit defeat and just drive away, when I saw the movement. It wasn't a man. It was a flash of white, unnaturally bright in the darkness, moving through the trees near where I kept the skidder. It was low to the ground, almost crawling. I raised my binoculars, my heart doing a frantic dance. It was a person, wearing a simple white cotton shift like a shroud or an old nightgown. They were impossibly thin, their arms and legs like sticks. And they weren't walking. They were moving in a strange, side-winding crawl like a spider or a crab. They reached the skidder, which I had purposely left unlocked this time, and stopped at the door. The figure didn't open the door. They simply rested their head against the metal, their face completely obscured by a curtain of long, black, lank hair, and they began to make a sound. It wasn't talking, it was humming, a high, wavering, wordless melody that echoed faintly through the night air. It sounded like an old lullaby, but completely devoid of warmth. Then the humming stopped. The figure raised its head and reached out a hand. I could clearly see the hand in the moonlight, long, skeletal fingers, pale as bone. It reached out and gently caressed the metal of the locked toolbox. I had left visible on the skitter's floor. It stayed there for a full minute, its fingers tracing the outline of the box. I was so paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the sight that I couldn't breathe. Finally, the figure pulled its hand away, turned, and began to crawl back into the trees, disappearing silently into the shadows of Widow's Creek. I didn't move for an hour. When I finally climbed down, my muscles ached from tension. I drove the skidder down the mountain and parked it. I packed my pickup. Every possession felt tainted. I didn't open the toolbox on the floor. I didn't want to know what new gift was waiting for me. I just threw the whole damn box into the deepest part of the creek, drove away, and never looked back at those ridges. I never got an answer. Was it a local who had gone feral? Was it the supposed ghost of Widow's Creek? I don't know, but I know this. The silence I found after leaving the mountains wasn't freedom, it was just the lack of confirmation. I still check my windows every morning when there's fog. I'm waiting for the day I see that familiar, perfect outline etched into the glass. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I find myself humming that strange, quiet melody, the lullaby of the crawling figure. And I have to clamp my hand over my mouth, because did the creature leave the mountain, or did it just hitch a ride inside my own mind? Story 4. My name is Finn, and I didn't mean to find trouble. I just wanted a week to walk the southern stretch of the Appalachian Trail, clear my head, and forget about the foreclosure on my business back home. I'd been hiking for 4 days through Pisgah National Forest, keeping a steady pace, rarely seeing another soul. The mistake was taking the old firebreak cut instead of sticking to the main blazed trail. It looked like a shortcut, marked only by faded orange tape, leading down into a deep, steep cove called the Sinks. It was beautiful down there, lush, overgrown, and suffocatingly quiet. I was picking my way through what locals call a laurel hell, a tangle of dense rhododendron thickets so tight you have to crawl, when I smelled it, wood smoke and something metallic like stale blood. I froze. No fires were allowed this time of year, and the scent of blood was strong enough to make my stomach churn. I dropped low and pushed silently through the last few yards of laurel. Then I saw it. It wasn't a camp, it was a compound. It was built into a natural hollow, completely hidden from the air, surrounded by a high electrified fence. Inside were several crude, blocky structures, a main cabin, a shed, and a weird, tall watchtower made of rough-hewn logs. There were no cars, only a couple of beat-up ATVs covered by tarps, and there was no trail leading in or out, suggesting they accessed it solely by those ATVs over rough terrain. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a friendly commune. This was something serious and secret. I was about 50 yards from the main cabin, high enough up the bank to see over the fence, and unfortunately, close enough to hear. I saw 3 men. They were all dressed alike in drab canvas utility clothes, and they moved with a military precision that felt deeply wrong in the middle of the woods. One of them, a thick-necked man with a greasy ponytail, was arguing fiercely with a younger, skinnier guy. "You tell me where you put it, you damn coward," the thick-necked man hissed. The skinny guy, he looked barely 19, was on his knees, his hands tied behind him with thick plastic zip ties. His face was a mess of cuts and tears. "I told you, Harlan, I never saw the list. Sam did, Sam took it," the kid cried, his voice raw. Harlan didn't argue. He just walked over to the shed, pulled out a gas can, and poured a wide circle of fuel around the terrified young man. "Sam's gone, boy," Harlan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying casual drawl. "And so is the list, and you're the one who let him run. This is what happens when you breach the covenant." I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. I was watching a summary execution unfold in front of me. I wasn't a hiker anymore. I was a reluctant witness to a capital crime. I knew I had to get out, but as I started to slowly, painfully back out of the thicket, a sound betrayed me. A small, dry stick, no bigger than my thumb, snapped loudly under my boot. Everything stopped. The three men inside the fence snapped their heads up, their movements synchronized and sudden. Harlan squinted in my direction, his eyes passing right over my hiding spot. But he knew the sound hadn't been an animal. Up on the ridge, he barked to the third man who was leaning against the porch railing. "Go check it slowly, bring the dog." The third man, a silent, heavily scarred guy, nodded once and melted into the trees on the opposite side of the cove. The dog, that was the real danger. I had maybe 3 minutes before that scar-faced killer and his tracking dog would be on my scent. I didn't have time for a slow, silent retreat. I had to create a distraction. I scrambled silently to the right, away from my initial position, and found a loose stack of baseball-sized rocks. I took aim at the top of the metal watchtower and threw 3 of them, hard and fast. Clang, clang, clang. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the hollow. The 2 men still inside the compound reacted instantly, diving behind the main cabin, hands on the pistol butts in their waistbands. "Get down," Harlan yelled. "They're flanking us, get the rifle now." I had bought myself perhaps 30 seconds, and more importantly, I had confused them into thinking they were under attack by multiple people. I turned and ran, not up the way I came, which was too steep and dense, but straight down the bank, cutting wide around the fence, hopping to hit the creek bed below the compound. I could hear the yells and the dogs now, a deep, guttural bark that meant business, a hound. I burst through the last line of rhododendrons and landed hard on the creek bank. The creek itself was shallow, rocky, and fast-moving. Good. Water breaks the scent trail. I didn't waste a second. I started running upstream, moving as fast as I could over the slick, mossy stones. The sound of the dog was getting closer, not behind me, but coming from the woods on the bank above. The third man, the tracker, was closing the distance. I ran for a solid 5 minutes, my lungs burning. I came to a place where the creek fell into a deep, cold pool. I could hear the dog's frantic sniffing right above me, 30 feet up the bank. I knew the dog would jump down onto the bank soon. I had to make the ultimate choice: submerge and freeze, or continue running and be caught. I plunged into the dark pool. The water was glacial, shocking my system. I held my breath, sinking to the bottom, hiding beneath an overhang of the bank. I focused on staying absolutely still, the cold seeping into my bones. I heard the man's voice directly above me. "Search, boy, find him." Then the dog landed on the bank, shaking water off its hide. It sniffed the exact spot where I had entered the water, and then it started barking, a furious, triumphant sound. "In the water, huh?" The man chuckled, his voice chillingly close. "Smart, but not smart enough." I heard the sound of a heavy stone being dragged across the bank. Then, a massive splash right where I was hiding, followed by the sound of the man kicking the surface water, trying to force me out. I was running out of air. My chest was screaming. The cold had numbed my fingers and toes. I knew if I stayed under much longer, I'd pass out. I pushed off the bottom and burst out of the water, coughing, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. The man was standing there, a cruel, satisfied grin on his face. He was holding a rusted machete that dripped with water. The dog was still barking, straining on its leash. "Well, look what the river dragged in," he said, advancing slowly. "You shouldn't have been poking around our business, little hiker. Now we gotta teach you to mind your own damn trail." I didn't try to run. I knew I couldn't outrun the dog or the machete. I had one card left. "You're too late," I gasped, trying to look him in the eye despite my shivering. "The other witness, he's already on the main road. He knows about the kid. And he knows Harlan is working for the sheriff." I'd made it up, a desperate, baseless guess, but the man's grin instantly vanished. The machete wavered. "What did you say?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "The kid you're killing," I pushed, selling the lie. He told me Harlan's been funneling the product through the sheriff's seized evidence lockup. That's why Sam ran. He has the paperwork, and my friend is driving to the state police headquarters right now. It was a shot in the dark, but it hit the target. The man's face went white. The idea that their entire structure, their local protection, might be compromised not by a witness to a murder but by a paperwork leak was the true existential threat to them. He didn't swing the machete, he didn't even argue. He clipped the dog's leash to a root, turned, and sprinted back up the bank toward the compound. "Harlan," he roared, "we got a problem." I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled up the bank, grabbed the dog's leash, and cut it with my knife. "Go," I yelled at the hound, giving it a shove toward the deeper woods. "Get out of here." I ran the opposite direction, following the creek downstream this time, driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate hope that my lie had bought me enough time to escape the hollow. I pushed myself through the night, not stopping until I hit a paved back road near dawn. I walked another 2 hours until I found a small, run-down gas station and called the state police. I gave them a highly detailed, anonymous tip about a large, heavily armed, off-grid criminal operation in the sinks, mentioning the electrified fence and the specific location. I mentioned the threat of violence and implied they were heavily involved with local law enforcement. I did not mention the murder I saw or the identity of the witness I fabricated. It was too dangerous. A week later, the papers ran a small story. A multi-agency task force had raided a heavily fortified compound in the Pisgah. Several arrests were made, including a man named Harlan, and a substantial amount of illegal contraband was recovered. They made no mention of the murder. I still have nightmares about that place, about the fire and the scream the young man must have made. I carry the guilt of not directly reporting the murder, but I also know that if I had, I'd likely be the one buried on that ridge. I finished my hike alone, but I'm no longer the person who started it. I traded my innocence for survival. And I never stop asking myself, did my lie save my life, or did it just guarantee that Harlan and his crew know exactly who I am and that I'm waiting for the day they get out of jail? I'll never know if the threat of the paperwork leak was enough to keep them from searching for the man they called the Little Hiker. Story 5. My name is Jedediah Jade, and I'm not proud of my business. Down in this holler, tucked away in the deep pocket of the Smoky Mountains, I grew, not heirloom tomatoes, I grew product. I was a small timer, just enough to keep my ailing mama's lights on and the dogs fed. My little 5-acre clearing was my whole world, hidden by dense rhododendron thickets and surrounded by tripwires and motion detectors I salvaged from a junk pile. I was paranoid, but in this line of work, you gotta be. It was 11:35 p.m. and I was in my cabin trying to fix a leak in a drip line when the power flickered. Just a quick blink and then it was back. The wind was low and the night was clear. No storm. What caused the power surge? A minute later, the screen of my security monitor, a cheap thing connected to a few solar-powered cameras, went dark. Not powered off, but the feed just died. Total static. My gut seized up. That wasn't an electrical surge. My main line was buried 20 feet down and connected to a separate solar backup. Something had been cut, deliberately, and that meant the tripwires and motion detectors were dead too. I grabbed my shotgun, a heavy, reliable Remington 870, and slipped on my boots. The silence outside was immediate and unnerving. Even the crickets had stopped. I crept to the back door, listening. I heard the sound of a truck engine far off, but getting closer. It wasn't the sound of a county vehicle or a delivery truck. It was the low, powerful thrum of a heavy-duty diesel, the kind city contractors use, and it was coming up the unmarked, unmaintained logging road that led only to my clearing. I knew instantly what this was. This wasn't a police raid. A raid is loud, full of yelling and sirens. This was the cleaner. I'd heard the rumors. Big growers, the kind with cartel money, don't use local thugs to solve problems. They hire outside professional crews, people who move silently, who don't leave witnesses, and who are paid not just to take the crop, but to make the problem vanish. I slipped out the back door and plunged into the thick darkness behind the cabin. I had to get to my bolt hole, a small, camouflaged pit I dug into the hillside, covered by a tarp and pine needles. The truck pulled into the clearing. I was close enough to see it. It was a massive black utility truck with no markings, not even a license plate visible. The back was a large, windowless box. Two figures emerged from the cab. They weren't hillbillies. They wore matching, military-style black ballistic vests and carried weapons I couldn't identify, long, silenced rifles. One was tall and slender, the other was built like a cinder block. They moved with a chilling, efficient grace. Cinder Block went straight for my generator shed. Tall Man walked directly to the main cabin door, which was still locked. He didn't waste time with a kick. He produced a strange, metallic device, a thermite torch, I think, and used it to quietly burn a perfect circle around the doorknob. The lock fell off with a soft clink. They weren't looking for me, not yet. They were looking for the product and the tools. They were preparing the site. I reached the hole and pulled back the tarp, sliding down into the damp, clay earth just as Tall Man emerged from the cabin carrying my strongbox and a few stacks of bundled currency. They didn't seem surprised to find the cabin empty. Cinder Block returned from the shed carrying 3 large, heavy-duty black bags. They were the size of body bags, and they looked ominously full already. "Find the primary," Tall Man instructed, his voice a flat, dead monotone devoid of any accent. Cinder Block pulled something from a pouch, a small, glowing device that looked like a laser rangefinder. He pointed it toward the greenhouse sheds in the clearing. "No heat signature, no dogs, no secondary shelter," he reported. "He's within 100 meters, small-scale operation, assume non-combatant." "Negative, assume armed and fleeing," Tall Man corrected. "The property must be neutralized. Find him before he reaches the creek. Use the secondary equipment." Cinder Block nodded and walked back to the truck. He opened the back of the black utility box. The interior was lit by a single bare bulb, revealing a shocking, meticulous collection of gear. Surgical kits, chemical containers, a large industrial shredder, and a whole rack of specialized disposal tools. This wasn't a cleanup, it was a disappearance factory. I watched Cinder Block pull out a large, heavy chainsaw and a thick, long spool of steel cable. My blood ran cold. They weren't just going to burn the crop. They were going to ensure nothing of me or my operation was left behind. I decided my only chance wasn't to stay hidden, but to run. I scrambled out of my bolt hole, keeping the shotgun pressed against my chest. I ran low, aiming for the thickest part of the woods toward the back ridge. The moon was high enough now to cast dappled light, but I knew this terrain better than they did. I hadn't gone 50 feet when I heard Cinder Block's flat voice cut through the night. Movement, 2 degrees right of the main clearing. Closing. How did he see me in this absolute blackness? I heard the whine of the chainsaw starting up, a monstrous high-pitched scream that echoed off the hills. It was a terrifying sound, not of logging, but of pure, violent threat. I ran harder, crashing through the brush, ignoring the branches whipping my face. I knew what they were planning, a coordinated sweep, driving me toward a predetermined point. I veered hard left, toward the creek. If I could get into the water, I might be able to slow them down. I reached the steep, muddy bank and slid down into the frigid, ankle-deep water. I turned to look back just as Tall Man stepped out of the woods, silent as a whisper. He wasn't carrying the rifle anymore. He held a taser gun in one hand and a small, clear syringe in the other. He looked directly at me. "Stop, Jedediah," he ordered, not yelling but simply stating a fact. "Don't make this a retrieval." "Stay back," I screamed, raising the shotgun. The sheer terror in my own voice was sickening. He smiled, a tiny, chilling upturn of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. "You think that's loaded with buckshot, don't you? It's not the payload, Jedediah. It's the sound. They pay us for silence." Before I could process that, before I could realize he wasn't afraid of my weapon because they were betting on silence, a powerful steel cable, thin and hard to see in the moonlight, whipped out from the darkness of the trees, snaring my legs. I went down hard, the shotgun flying from my grasp and sinking into the muddy creek bottom. Cinder Block emerged, walking toward me, unspooling the cable with a practiced ease. The chainsaw was strapped to his back. Tall man approached slowly, the syringe glinting under the moonlight. "It's a fast-acting paralytic, Jedediah. No pain, no fuss, just silence." I scrabbled backward on my elbows, the slick mud hindering me. I saw the terror in my own mind, the black box, the shredder, the lack of a funeral. I reached the water's edge. I had nowhere left to go. "Please," I begged, the word catching in my throat. "Just take the money, take it all. I'll walk away." Tall man sighed, a sound of professional exasperation. "It's not about the money, Jedediah. It's about the contract. We have to clean the space. You are part of the space." He lunged. I managed to twist away from the paralyzing shot, but his hand slammed down on my back, pinning me. The sheer weight and force drove my face into the mud. I inhaled water and silt. As I struggled, half drowning, I saw Cinder Block walking toward us, reaching back and unstrapping the chainsaw. The sound of the idling motor was the soundtrack to my absolute dread. I focused on the one thing they couldn't control, the ground. As Tall Man adjusted his weight to administer the drug, I used my last burst of strength to thrust my elbow backward, deep into his ribs, and at the same time, I leveraged my weight to slam my head down. It wasn't a fight move. It was a desperate attempt to disrupt the clean efficiency. My head hit something hard in the creek bed, the stock of my submerged shotgun. I didn't think. I seized it, ignoring the burning cold of the water and the powerful pressure on my back. I brought the butt of the rifle up and hammered it blindly backward, hitting Tall Man squarely in the face. He let out a short, surprised gasp and rolled off me, clutching his nose. The syringe went flying into the darkness. I scrambled up, dragging the shotgun. I didn't have time to load it. Cinder Block was 20 feet away, the chainsaw roaring, advancing with chilling slowness. I raised the stock and threw the whole heavy weapon, not at Cinder Block, but directly into the spinning chain of the saw. The impact was loud, violent, and perfect. The heavy wooden stock jammed the chain, sending a high-pitched, metallic shriek of stressed steel. The engine died instantly, the chainsaw now just a useless, smoking hunk of metal. Cinder Block stopped, genuinely stunned by the move. That was all I needed. I didn't stop to fight. I didn't look at the moaning Tall Man. I spun and plunged into the deepest part of the creek, scrambling up the opposite bank, back into the maze of the Laurel Hell. I ran until I hit the next ridge, collapsing behind a massive boulder, my lungs screaming for air. I waited until the early hours of dawn. I heard the sounds of their diesel engine starting up, the heavy rumble fatting away down the logging road. They left. They took the crop, the money, and all their tools, including their broken chainsaw. They didn't leave a body, but they didn't get mine either. I didn't go back for anything. I walked out of those woods with nothing but the clothes on my back and the mud on my skin. I never called the police. Who would I report? The cleaners. I'm living 3 states over now, washing dishes in a greasy diner. I'm poor, but I'm alive. I see a black, unmarked truck drive by sometimes. It's always a different model, but it's always black, always heavy duty. I know they didn't leave because they gave up. They left because they ran out of time, or they knew that a cleanup job that requires extensive searching and loud chases violates their protocol of silence. But I broke their protocol, and I damaged their equipment. I wake up every morning asking myself, Does an incomplete contract mean the job is terminated? Or does it just mean the cleaners will simply charge the contract holder extra for the witness neutralization addendum? I'll never know, but I check the diner's supply shipments every week. I'm terrified that one day I'll find a box addressed to the kitchen, and inside, tucked neatly among the cans, will be a single, perfect, cleanly severed piece of steel cable. Story 6. My name is Clara. I'm 30 years old and I hate the smell of mothballs and stale wood smoke. That's the smell of my inheritance, my grandmother Alara's house, perched halfway up Lookout Mountain in Tennessee. She died 2 months ago and I was the only one left to deal with the place. I needed to empty it, sell it, and get out. The house was isolated. The nearest neighbor was a mile down the winding dirt road and the closest town was an hour's drive. It was built in 1940, thick hand-cut chestnut logs and a fieldstone chimney that took up half the living room. Grandma had lived there alone for 40 years, and in the last few she'd become fiercely protective of her things. She'd always say, "This house is a keeper, Clara. It holds on to what's ours." I used to think she meant memories. I was about to find out she meant something else entirely. I arrived around noon. The air was thin and cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. I spent the afternoon boxing up old linens and dishes. It was tedious, quiet work, but manageable until the sun started to drop. Around 8 p.m., the mountain darkness slammed down, thick and absolute. I was in the kitchen trying to find the breaker box when I heard the first noise. It was a slow, distinct scrape from the second floor, like a heavy piece of furniture being dragged across the bare wood. I froze, heart accelerating. "Hello," I called out, my voice swallowed instantly by the hollow rooms. "Is someone up there?" Silence. I knew I was alone. I'd locked the front door, the heavy iron bolt clicking into place when I arrived. The windows were either locked or jammed shut. The house had been vacant since she was taken to the hospital. Rats, squirrels, old house noises, I told myself, grabbing the heavy iron fireplace poker. I crept up the narrow, creaking staircase. The air grew colder with every step. I reached the landing and peered into the 3 small bedrooms. All of them were exactly as I left them, filled with dusty, silent furniture. I walked into Grandma's room. Her heavy walnut dresser stood against the far wall. I ran my hand over the top, dusty, untouched, no sign of movement. Then I saw it, the closet door. It was a heavy, old plank door, and Grandma always kept it shut tight. Now it was ajar, just a sliver of darkness visible at the seam. I pushed the door open. Inside it was pitch black, smelling intensely of that old, dusty wool. I pointed my weak phone flashlight into the gloom. Clothes, shoes, boxes, nothing moving. But something was missing. Grandma had a full-length mirror, an oval antique with a heavy, ornate frame that had always stood against the inside of that closet door. It was gone. My blood turned to ice. That mirror was huge, 4 feet tall. There was no way a squirrel had moved it. If it wasn't a critter and it wasn't me, then who was in this locked house, and why would they take a mirror? I backed out slowly, eyes scanning the dark room. I went back downstairs, my mind racing. Someone had been in the house, maybe recently, and they were trying to mess with me. I checked the back door and the cellar door, both locked. I didn't see any sign of forced entry. I decided I had to leave. I grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter, and then I realized my second, far greater problem. The house landline was dead. My phone had no signal. I was trapped here until morning. I tried to barricade myself in the living room, pushing a heavy, horsehair armchair against the main door. I sat down with the poker and my flashlight, determined to wait out the night. I was shivering, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror when I heard the sound again. This time, it wasn't a scrape. It was a shuffle directly above my head. I looked up at the ceiling. The sound stopped. "Show yourself," I yelled, my voice shaking. "I have a weapon." A moment of silence, then a thud like something heavy being dropped. I waited, my knuckles white on the poker. Nothing. Finally, driven by a terrible curiosity, I crept back up the stairs. The air on the landing was even colder. I went straight to Grandma's room. The door was open. I swept the flashlight beam around. Everything was the same except for the dresser. The top drawer of the heavy, 5-drawer dresser was pulled out about 4 inches. I walked to the drawer and looked inside. It was full of Grandma's old scarves and lace handkerchiefs, but nestled on top of the scarves was a small, oval shard of mirrored glass. It was a perfect piece, cut cleanly from a larger sheet, and its silver backing was scratched off in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I knew where it came from. The house was taking the mirror apart piece by piece. The terror I felt wasn't of a burglar. It was of the house itself. My grandmother's parting words echoed in my ears. It holds on to what's ours. I backed away, stumbling out of the room. I felt a chill wind rush past me on the landing. I looked down the hall toward the guest room. The door to the guest room was slowly, silently swinging open. I raised the poker flashlight beam fixed on the opening. I saw nothing but the dark furniture, but I heard something now, a low, thin whisper, too soft to make out the words. It sounded like an old woman mumbling. "No, it's the air, the pipes," I thought desperately. I took a shaky step toward the door. The whispering stopped. Then from inside the room, I heard the sound of heavy, measured footsteps, moving slowly across the wood floor, coming directly toward the doorway. 1, 2, 3. I waited for a figure to appear, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it felt like it would break. The footsteps stopped right inside the threshold. "Silence." I forced myself to speak. "If you don't step out, I'm calling the police." From the darkness of the room, something was thrown. It hit the floor right at the edge of the doorway, skittering across the wood, stopping at my feet. It was a lock of hair, long, gray, and tied with a piece of faded blue ribbon, the exact ribbon I had seen earlier that day, tying a bundle of letters in a desk drawer. I screamed, a short, sharp burst of sound, and bolted. I ran down the stairs, scrambling over the overturned armchair. I had to get out, locked door or not. I rushed to the back door, yanking on the handle. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against it. It was solid chestnut, it didn't give. I ran back into the living room, grabbing the heaviest chair. I was going to smash a window, any window. But as I looked toward the front window, I stopped. Resting on the sill, perfectly centered in the moonlight, was the large, ornate mirror frame. It was empty. The glass was completely gone, and leaning against the frame like a sentinel was the closet door itself. The house had disassembled itself, piece by piece, and brought its parts downstairs to block my exit. I was surrounded. The sound started then, coming from all directions at once. The scraping from the upstairs, the mumbling from the guest room, the slow, agonizing creak of the front door bolt being slowly, agonizingly withdrawn. I threw the chair through the window, not bothering to aim. The glass shattered, but the opening was small and jagged. I heard the front door swing open. I didn't see anyone, but a draft of air rushed in, smelling cold and ancient, carrying with it a powerful scent of mothballs and decay. I scrambled through the broken window, tearing my clothes and scraping my skin on the jagged glass. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran down the steep, wooded hill behind the house, toward the blackness of the mountain. I ran until I collapsed, hiding behind the roots of a massive maple tree, shaking so hard I could barely stand. I spent the rest of the night freezing, watching the dark silhouette of the house on the ridge. I never saw a light. I never saw a figure. I just saw the black, gaping hole of the front doorway. When the sun finally rose, bathing the clearing in weak yellow light, the front door was closed again. The empty mirror frame was gone. I walked the 3 miles down the road and found a logging crew who drove me to town, I never went back. I signed the property over to a local realtor, telling him to sell it as is. I took a massive loss. I still have the scars on my arms from the glass, and I still wake up at night, absolutely convinced that the thin little oval of mirrored glass I saw in the drawer, the shard that reflected the house's intentions, is still out there. And I always wonder, did the house want to keep me as its memory, or did it need a new set of eyes to replace the mirror it had shattered? And what happened to the rest of the missing glass? Sometimes I catch my reflection in a store window, and I swear that for a brief, cold second, the eyes looking back at me aren't mine. They're old, wide, and full of that fierce, stubborn mountain refusal to ever let go. Story 7. The thing about desperation is it makes you stupid, but it makes you feel smart enough to handle the stupid thing you're about to do. I was 22, staring down an eviction notice, and the only thing worth a damn I owned was a busted-up Ford Ranger. That's how I ended up on the porch of Amos Rigg, the old man everyone in town said was crazy, up on Buzzard Peak. It was just past sundown when I got there. The air was already cold, the kind of damp cold that sinks into your bones. Amos's cabin looked less like a home and more like something the mountain had coughed up: gray logs, a sagging roof, and a chimney that spat thin, sour smoke. He paid in cash for odd jobs, no questions asked. Tonight, the job was strange. He opened the door a crack, his eyes yellow in the dim light. "You're late, boy. Thought you ran off." "Got stuck behind a logging truck, Amos. What's the job?" I tried to keep my voice steady. This was already unnerving. He opened the door wider, beckoning me inside with a crooked finger. The smell hit me first: pine smoke, mildew, and something metallic like old pennies. A mess, Shane. A damn awful mess. My boy Elias, he was out hunting deer, said he saw a monster, panicked, and shot clear across the ravine. He led me into the kitchen. The light was just a single, flickering bulb hanging by a frayed wire, and there, stretched out on a faded green tarp near the wood stove, was the deer. It was a man. My heart didn't just sink, it slammed into my ribs. He was younger than Amos, maybe late 30s, wearing heavy hunting gear, and there was a dark, wet stain soaking through his jacket. "Jesus, Amos," I whispered, stepping back, bumping into a counter covered in dusty jars. "You shot a man." "No, Elias did," he hissed, leaning in, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "Elias is gone now, ran off down the mountain soon as he realized. Accident, I swear to God, but who's gonna believe a rig up here? They'll say murder. They always do." He was trembling, looking genuinely terrified. That helped, strangely. It made the situation feel less like a setup and more like the catastrophic screw-up he claimed. "So what do you need me to do?" My voice was hollow. I was already halfway down a road I couldn't turn back from. The thought of walking away and calling the sheriff only to have Amos lie and say I was involved, or worse, that I shot the man, kept my feet rooted. "Help me put him to rest, out in the woods. Nobody needs to know. You get $500 cash tonight." $500, enough to delay the eviction, enough to buy time. That's the siren song of desperation. "Where are we putting him?" I asked, swallowing hard, trying to sound practical, not terrified. Amos didn't answer immediately. He shuffled over to a corner and pulled a rusty key from his overalls. He pointed toward a trapdoor near the stove, a square of dark, rough-hewn wood with a heavy iron ring. "Down in the root cellar, just for the night. Can't bury a man right when the ground's this hard. Tomorrow, when the moon's gone, we take him out." Why not just take him out now? Why the cellar? The questions were screaming in my head, but I kept them locked down. We wrapped the body tightly in the tarp. It was heavy, dead weight, and cold to the touch even through the layers of fabric. The hardest part wasn't the weight, though. It was the sheer silence of it, the terrible finality. We lifted the trapdoor. A gust of cold, earthy air rushed up, smelling intensely of spoiled vegetables and wet dirt. The opening was small, and the ladder looked rickety. "You go down first," Amos ordered, his voice suddenly hard. "Need you to brace him from below." I climbed down. The single weak beam of my cheap flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The cellar was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with dirt walls and floor. Shelves lined one wall, packed with jars of pickles and preserves, glinting like dark eyes. "All right, Amos, drop him down easy," I called up, my voice muffled by the low ceiling. It wasn't easy. The man tumbled down with a sickening thud, landing half on his back. I wrestled the weight off my legs and pulled the body toward the far corner, away from the ladder. "He's secure, Amos," I said, looking up into the darkness where his face should be. He didn't reply right away. Then I heard a scrape of wood. My flashlight, lying on the dirt floor, swung wildly as I looked up. Amos wasn't climbing down. He was slowly, deliberately lowering the trapdoor. "Wait, what the hell are you doing?" "Amos, open the damn door. We gotta get out of here." My panic was sharp, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Can't do that, Shane." His voice drifted down, calm now, colder than the cellar air. "You've seen him now, too much liability. You said it was an accident. You said Elias shot him." A dry, rattling laugh came from above. "Elias didn't shoot nobody. I shot him. That fella was sniffing around where he shouldn't have been." My breath hitched. He had lied about the sun, the accident, everything. This wasn't a cover-up, it was a cleanup, and I was the next piece of trash. I scrambled back to the ladder, fumbling for the rungs, but the heavy iron bolt on the underside of the trapdoor slid home with a terrible, grinding clank. I was sealed in. "You can wait there till tomorrow, boy. Keep all George company. I got a little job to do on the north slope, then I'll be back for you both." I started kicking and hammering on the thick wood, screaming, but the sound was deadened by the earth above. The fear was a physical thing, crushing my chest. I turned back into the darkness. Did he really intend to leave me here all night? What was he doing on the north slope? I slid down to the dirt floor, trying to catch my breath, forcing myself to think. I aimed my flashlight at the walls. Dirt, packed hard, shelves of preserves. I shone the beam onto the body in the corner. George. His eyes were open, staring up blankly. That's when I noticed it. Not the smell, which was bad enough, but something else. Something on the shelves. There were maybe 50 jars of preserves, all dusty, all unlabeled. But 3 of them, right near George's feet, were clean. Spotless. They were filled with a strange, thick, clear liquid that didn't look like any pickle or jam I'd ever seen. It looked faintly pink. Then my beam swept past the floor again, and I saw the shovel. Not the short-handled kind you use for garden beds. This was a heavy, long-handled trenching shovel, its blade caked with dried mud and horrifyingly dark, stiff hairs. He said the ground was too hard. He said he couldn't bury a man right. If the ground was too hard, why was the shovel so heavily used? Why were those 3 jars so recently cleaned? Suddenly, I wasn't just trapped. I was trapped in a murderer's workspace. Amos didn't just shoot one man. He was doing things down here. Things that required a shovel and possibly, terrifyingly, those clean, unlabeled jars. I turned the light back onto the body of George, the victim of the hunting accident. I squatted down, fighting the nausea, and looked closer at the wound. It wasn't a clean deer slug hole. It was a jagged, messy wound, and the surrounding jacket looked torn, not just pierced. I ran my hand along the cold dirt wall, searching for any loose stones, any weakness. Nothing. It was solid earth. The air was getting thin and the smell was getting worse, that metallic smell, and now something sharp and chemical. I moved the flashlight over the shelves again, my fingers scraping along the jars, searching for something, anything I could use as a wedge or a weapon. I grabbed one of the dusty, older jars, pickled green beans, and brought it down. The glass was thick. But as I reached for another, I saw it. Tucked deep on the top shelf, half hidden by a tangle of old wire, was a single photograph. It was old, yellowed, and barely visible in the weak light. I pulled it down. It was a picture of Amos, much younger, standing beside another man who bore a frightening resemblance to George. They were smiling, holding up a deer. Below their feet, clearly visible, was a small brass plaque on the wall marking the cellar. The plaque read, "The Rig Smokehouse and Preservation Cellar, S. 1952. Smokehouse Preservation." My mind started putting pieces together sickeningly fast. The strange chemical smell, the smooth jars, the torn wound on the body, the deep shovel. Amos hadn't just used this place to hide a body for the night. He used it for preservation. Was George family? And if Amos preserves things, what was he planning to do with me? I looked back at the heavy, locked trapdoor, then at the silent, staring body of George, and finally at the jar of thick, faintly pink liquid. I had to get out, not just to escape prison, but to escape becoming an exhibit. I raised the jar of green beans I'd grabbed, my hands slick with sweat, and slammed the bottom corner as hard as I could into the wooden frame near the door latch. The jar exploded, shrapnel flying, and the scent of vinegar filled the air. The heavy wood didn't budge, not an inch. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, the chemical smell mixing with the vinegar. That's when I felt it, a slight draft. I shone the light into the corner near the ladder. The dirt looked looser there, disturbed. I pressed my shoulder against it. It gave slightly. A smaller, older wooden panel had been covered over with packed earth, probably to stabilize the ladder. Hope, cold and desperate, surged through me. I picked up a larger, flatter shard of glass from the broken jar and began scraping the earth away from the faint seam in the wood. I had no idea where it led or what was behind it, but I knew what waited if I stayed. The scraping was loud in the dark silence. I didn't stop. I had to be out before the sun rose, before Amos Rigg came back from the North Slope. What was he doing on the North Slope? Hunting or preparing a new container? The thought fueled my frantic digging. I had maybe 6 inches of earth to clear. I just prayed this passage wasn't another trap. Story 8. You don't drive the Black Creek Pass after midnight unless you absolutely have to. The road is old Route 31, a ribbon of asphalt poured down a cliffside 50 years ago and mostly forgotten when the interstate opened up. It's 10 miles of blind curves, 0 cell service, and drop-offs that'll swallow a truck whole. I was driving it because my shift at the all-night diner in Harlan ran late, and it cut 40 minutes off the trip back home to my place near the state line. It was 1:25 a.m., and the fog had rolled in thick, the kind that sucks the light right out of your high beams. I had the radio volume low, just the hiss and a faint, distorted country tune, and my windows up. The only sound was the whine of my Honda Civic's tired engine struggling up the grade. I just cleared the worst of the hairpin turns, the part locals call the devil's elbow, when I saw the brake lights. They were sudden, harsh red blooms in the fog, pulled sideways and stopped dead in the middle of the narrow lane, right before the wooden bridge over Black Creek. What in God's name? My foot hit the brake. It was a large, dark pickup truck, the kind with heavy brush guards. It was idling, its engine a low, ominous rumble. I slowed to a crawl, easing my car up to maybe 10 feet behind it. I figured someone had broken down or hit a deer. I flicked my brights once, a polite little query. That's when I saw the movement outside the truck. 2 figures, big men, dark silhouettes in bulky clothing, were struggling with a third person on the roadside, right on the muddy shoulder. The third figure was smaller, thrashing violently, muffled screams cutting through the silence of the fog. It wasn't a broken-down vehicle. It was an active, brutal assault, a kidnapping. My stomach dropped out. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My first, panicked instinct was to blast the horn and floor it past them, straight across the bridge and to the nearest town. But the smaller figure, it was a woman. I could see her pale shirt fluttering. She gave one last, terrible surge, pulling her arm free just long enough to throw something shiny and dark onto the asphalt before the men wrestled her into the back seat of the pickup. The driver, a massive guy with a hood cinched tight around his face, slammed the door. The thud echoed off the creek banks. They saw me, did they see me? The truck shifted into gear, headlights off. It began to pull slowly forward, not across the bridge, but just barely enough to leave me blocked, nose to tail. I immediately reached for my phone. No service, of course. Black Creek Crossing, the black hole of Appalachia. I needed to get away, but they were ahead of me. If I backed up, I'd have to execute a three-point turn on the edge of a cliff. If I waited, they might decide to eliminate the witness. The pickup started inching forward again, finally moving onto the bridge. It was slow, deliberate, almost taunting. I had to get the license plate. I squinted into the fog, trying to pierce the gloom, but the license plate was either muddy or removed. I couldn't tell. Just as the truck's brake lights disappeared around the next curve, I saw the object the woman had thrown. It lay sparkling under the faint glow of my Civic's headlights. A small, dark plastic card, like a key card or a hotel room key. "Don't stop, Sarah. Just drive." My survival instinct screamed at me to hit the gas and flee. But if I drove, the only thing that could lead the police back to this spot, the only trace of that woman, would be ground up under my tires. I forced myself out of the car. The air was frigid and heavy, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. I moved like a shadow, keeping my movements tight, listening for the sound of the truck engine. I heard nothing but the rush of the creek below the bridge. I found the card. It was a key card, embossed with a logo I didn't recognize, a stylized bird inside a hexagonal crest. It also had a 4-digit number handwritten on the back, 4102. I shoved it deep into my pocket. As I turned to get back into the car, my foot kicked something heavier. I bent down. It was a small, high-end satellite phone, not the kind truckers use, but a professional-grade unit. Why would a struggling woman have a sat phone? And why would they leave it? I picked it up. It was heavy and the screen was cracked, but the power light was blinking. It was active. My fingers, shaking, fumbled with the screen. It was on the home display, but the last outgoing call was still visible. It wasn't a number, it was a word. Alpha. Before I could do anything else, a sound shattered the silence. A rapid, rhythmic clicking coming from the dense woods across the road. I froze. It sounded like someone racking a pump-action shotgun. I dove back into my car, fumbling the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I didn't care about noise anymore. I slammed the door and threw the gear selector into drive. I sped across the bridge, my tires splashing through a puddle, and didn't ease up until I was a full mile past the Black Creek crossing. I pulled over by a dilapidated wooden sign for a defunct mine, turning off the engine and the headlights. My heart was pounding like a jackhammer. I was safe for now. I needed to call the police. I stared at the satellite phone. If I tried to use it, would it alert the kidnappers? Was it GPS tracked? I decided it was too risky. I'd drive until I got service on my own phone. But what if they weren't just common thugs? If they had a satellite phone and were communicating with someone named Alpha, this felt like something bigger, organized. I reached for my own phone again, forgetting the uselessness of it. I kept staring at the keycard in my hand, the strange hexagonal crest. Where did that belong? A corporate retreat, a private security facility. Then I noticed the mud on my shoe. When I had stepped out of the car, I hadn't just kicked the sat phone. I'd stepped right beside where the woman had been thrown down. There was a smear of dark, metallic-smelling mud on my worn tennis shoe, but embedded in the mud was something else. A small, dark cylinder, no bigger than a peanut. I picked it off. It was a used bullet casing, not the kind used for hunting deer. It was a 9mm casing, the kind used in pistols or submachine guns. Wait, if they shot someone, where was the body? I only saw 3 people. Did they already dump a body and this woman was meant to replace it? The pieces weren't fitting together like a kidnapping for ransom. This felt darker, more like logistics. I drove for another 15 minutes, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Nothing but the endless fog and the looming silhouettes of the Appalachian ridges. Finally near the town of Elkhorn, not my home, but a place with a single gas station and hopefully a signal, my phone gave a triumphant little ping. 2 bars. I pulled into the empty gas station lot and called 911. 911. What is your emergency? I spoke quickly, my voice raspy. I detailed the truck, the location, Black Creek crossing, the assault, the sat phone, and the key card. The dispatcher, a woman named Janice, sounded calm but efficient. Okay, ma'am, we have units en route to that area. Can you describe the attackers? Big dark clothes, maybe a hood. I couldn't get a face or a license plate. But listen, the woman threw a key card. It has a number on the back, 4102, and there's a logo, a hexagonal crest with a bird. There was a strange, beat-long silence on the line. Ma'am, where did you say you are now? Elkhorn at the quick stop. Ma'am, stay right there. A state trooper will be with you in less than 5 minutes. Do not move the key card or the phone. And ma'am, could you describe the men's truck again, please? Dark pickup, brush guard, large. Why, did you find something? I can't share information over the line, ma'am. Just stay put. Her voice, though still calm, had a subtle shift in tone. The kind of shift that suggests a massive red flag had just gone up on her screen. I hung up, breathing hard, looking around the empty gas station. 5 minutes. Then I saw it. Slowly pulling out from behind the tree line across the road, its headlights still off, was a vehicle. It was large. It was dark. And even from this distance, the shape looked exactly like the pickup truck at Black Creek Crossing. My blood ran cold. How did they turn around? Did they hear the call, or were there more of them? It wasn't speeding. It was moving at a casual, predatory crawl, its nose pointed directly at the quick stop. My state trooper was still 5 minutes away. This truck was less than 30 seconds. I realized with sickening certainty that when I gave the dispatcher the keycard number and the crest description, she didn't just log it. She triggered something massive, and they knew exactly where the call was made from. I threw the Civic into reverse, spun the wheel, and squealed out of the gas station lot. I had to get away from the main road. I had to ditch the sat phone and the keycard somewhere safe and untraceable. As I drove toward a small, unmarked dirt road leading up into the wooded hills, the dark pickup truck accelerated, its heavy engine finally roaring to life. Its headlights flashed on, twin blinding beams in the rearview mirror, closing the distance instantly. What does that keycard open? What is Alpha? And what the hell did that woman get involved in that required a sat phone and warranted a silent, professional recovery in the middle of the night? I wasn't an innocent witness anymore. I was a loose end, driving a beat-up Civic toward the dark mountain, with a terrifying secret and a rapidly approaching vehicle that didn't just want to stop me, but eliminate the evidence I carried. I pushed the gas pedal to the floor, praying the old logging road could buy me enough time to disappear into the Appalachian shadows.